Now, multi-faith groups in Canada have formed protective human shields around mosques in the wake of deadly gun attack on an Islamic center in Quebec last week. Activists formed rings of peace at midday Friday prayers. Coordinated actions were taken in Toronto, Edmonton, and St. John's. Activists said that they sought to show their outrage against anti-Muslim hate crimes. A student behind the Sunday attack in Quebec has been described as pro-Trump, anti-immigration, and pro-far right. On Friday, thousands gathered in Quebec for the funeral of the last of the 6 victims of Sunday's shooting. Pardon me. An earlier funeral in Montreal was attended by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, whose government has denounced the act as an act of terror.
The American Customs Agency has told the US airlines that they can resume boarding banned travelers after a federal judge in Seattle temporarily blocked President Trump's executive order. The agency told the airlines that they can operate as they had before last week's order, which banned travelers from 7 mainly Muslim countries for 90 days. The Justice Department is planning to file an emergency stay of the ruling. The White House says President Trump's directive is lawful and appropriate. In a statement, it said the order is intended to protect the homeland, and he has the constitutional authority and responsibility to protect the American people. Now, this executive order triggered a massive international backlash from leaders around the world and caused chaos at airports across the United States.
Another day, another fresh round of protests directed at U.S. President Donald Trump. In Washington, D.C. and many other cities, legions of demonstrators continue to rail against the administration. They say they are fed up with Trump's efforts to bar immigrants from 7 mostly Muslim nations from entering the U.S. Trump is doubling down, lashing out through his preferred medium with a series of tweets. One reading, "The opinion of this so-called judge, which essentially takes law enforcement away from our country, is ridiculous and will be overturned." In office a little more than 2 weeks, Trump now faces a growing chorus at home and abroad, unhappy with his performance.
We are here united to proclaim that we are all Americans. We are here in unity, in solidarity with the Muslim community, saying we are with them. We are against the threats that they are facing from these executive orders.
You don't build a strong nation by saying, hey, the person next door, I'm not going to trust you, I'm going to be suspicious of you, because that only creates and fuels hatred and fear.
Trump's spokesman is vowing to fight the ruling from a federal judge in Washington state that for the time being slams the brakes on the travel ban. The administration says it will file a legal challenge through the U.S. Department of Justice at the earliest possible time. Trump's first couple of weeks in office have been characterized by dropping poll numbers and legal action. Already, Trump faces 55 lawsuits filed against his actions, more than 10 times greater than the average of the last 3 U.S. presidents.
This is what democracy looks like!
In the meantime, the number of U.S. protests from coast to coast shows no sign of abating. The U.S. State Department had revoked some 60,000 visas from abroad since Trump instituted the travel ban on January 27th. But for the time being, it is back to travel as usual, with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security saying it has halted any and all actions related to the travel ban.
This is a Fox News alert on a show of defiance from Iran as it holds a massive military exercise. The drill coming just one day after President Trump slapped new sanctions on the country for a recent missile test. State media saying Tehran testing missile and radar systems as well as cyber warfare programs. Our John Huddy is live from our Middle East Bureau with more. John?
Right, and there's great concern about this because, as you mentioned, it comes just a day after the U.S. leveled those sanctions against Iran. And adding to just the overall concern, the rhetoric coming out of Iran's military, one Revolutionary Guard Brigadier General Kelly said that that, quote, any misstep from Iran's enemies will result in its missiles roaring down on their heads. Clearly, tough talk aimed at the U.S. and, of course, President Trump. Now, as you mentioned, Kelly, today Iran's Revolutionary Guard's aerospace unit tested its missile and radar systems, cyber warfare systems, and command and control centers, again, a day after the Trump administration imposed sanctions on Iran because of the ballistic missile test that was carried out on Sunday. And President Trump, as we know, tweeted Friday that Iran is playing with fire. Well, today, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis said that Iran's conduct will have to be addressed. U.S. officials have indicated that more actions could follow. We don't have specifics, so we're waiting on that. But the secretary also said that Iran is the single biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Still, he said that despite the recent tension with Iran, he doesn't think it warrants an increase in the number of U.S. forces in the Middle East. And Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, is trying to put a more diplomatic face on this, saying that his country will never initiate a war or use its weapons against anyone unless it's in self-defense. But other Iranian leaders are taking a more proactive tone. In fact, the senior Iranian cleric, Ayatollah Khatami, told his followers yesterday, quote, our missile drills are a show of might. We are living in a world of wolves, wolves such as the arrogant government of America. And then his followers, thousands of them, Kelly, chanted in unison, death to America. Kelly.
That's disturbing.
The Romanian Prime Minister says that he will now scrap a decree that would have shielded dozens of politicians from prosecution for corruption following 5 days of mass protests in the country.
Tomorrow there will be an emergency government meeting. We repeal this decree. I do not want to divide Romania. It cannot be cut in half.
Sorin Grindeanu made the announcement in a televised speech. Despite the statement, nearly 170,000 anti-corruption protesters held a rally outside his office in the capital, Bucharest, calling on him to resign. Demonstrations were held in other major cities throughout the country. Now, under the planned law, a financial wrongdoing would only be punishable by jail if it exceeds over $47,000. Protesters see the new measure as a retreat by the government on widespread anti-corruption campaign. Recent marches have been the biggest since the 1989 protests, during which Romanians overthrew dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. Now, violence has flared up in eastern Ukraine as government troops and pro-Russian forces remain locked in fighting. In the latest round of clashes, a commander of the pro-Russian troops was killed when his car exploded. Now, 3 Ukrainian soldiers were also killed in shelling. Fighting between government forces and pro-Russian militias has escalated over the past week in the east of the country. Dozens of people have lost their lives and scores have been wounded in the recent violence, among them civilians as well. Now, 2 sides accuse each other of violating a 2-year-old ceasefire deal on a near-daily basis. Russian-speaking regions in eastern Ukraine demand greater autonomy from Kiev. Close to 10,000 people have perished since April 2014, when the Ukrainian army launched its military operation to crush pro-Russia forces.
The front cover of German weekly magazine Der Spiegel's newest edition, sparking controversy with its depiction of U.S. President Donald Trump beheading the Statue of Liberty.
He thinks too hard.
This man says he finds it too severe. Very provocative image, this man says. That's what first comes to mind. The cover was designed by Cuban artist Adel Rodriguez, who told the Washington Post, quote, "It's a beheading of democracy, a beheading of a sacred symbol." The cover follows a series of attacks on Berlin's policies by Trump and his aides. Last month, Trump said Chancellor Angela Merkel made a catastrophic mistake with her open-door migration policy. And this week, his top trade advisor said Germany was using a grossly undervalued euro to gain advantage over the U.S. and others. Attacks which are marking a rapid deterioration in U.S.-German relations.
Protesters staged a protest outside of the U.S. Embassy in Manila. They also called for the abolition of the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement between the U.S. and the Philippines. Well, the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta also has seen over 100 activists holding anti-U.S. placards Indonesia has the world's largest Muslim population, though it is not among the countries facing restrictions. In Sydney, about 1,000 people gathered to protest against the Muslim ban. U.S. ties with Australia have become strained after Trump said a deal between the two nations on refugee resettlement was dumb. Under the deal, the U.S. would take more than 1,000 asylum seekers held on Nauru and Manus. In return, Australia would take refugees from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras.
Now, prosecutors in France believe the man who tried to attack the Louvre Museum was an Egyptian national who was in Paris on a tourist visa. Officials say the 29-year-old, who is yet to be named, is thought to have travelled to Paris from Dubai last month. Police are trying to work out if the man acted alone or under instructions from a terrorist group. The attacker, who was wielding a machete, was seriously injured after he was shot in the stomach 3 times by soldiers. At the time of the incident, tourists were packed inside the museum, which is home to thousands of celebrated artworks, including the Mona Lisa.
A bus carrying 28 passengers has hit a railway bridge tunnel in Taiwan. 21 people, including 3 children, were injured in the accident in the city of Kaohsiung. All of the injured were taken to 3 local hospitals for treatment. The 28 passengers include 25 tourists and a tour guide from East China's Zhejiang province. The 2 others are a tour guide and a bus driver from Taiwan. All except the mainland tour guide, who suffered a head injury, have left the hospital. Now, the accident was possibly caused by the driver who underestimated the height of the bus. Further investigation is now underway.
Fatemeh Rashad was not allowed into the country after President Donald Trump signed an executive order banning people from 7 Muslim-majority countries. Fatemeh and her mother are currently in Dubai, where they're seeking tourist visas to get an appointment at a hospital in Oregon, where Fatemeh's uncle and grandparents live. However, Cuomo said that pediatric cardiac doctors at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York have agreed to help the family for free, and that a law firm will cover the travel expenses, which is a condition needed to obtain a special visa.